A lot of these large industrial sites, data center, a manufacturing facility, an oil and gas field, a lot of times they have continuous load, or they've got variable load, but the load is very high. And, I'm talking about customers that take somewhere between 20 megawatts up to a couple hundred megawatts a year. When you think about that customer, they're pulling power on that grid sector all the time.
Yep.
If you can put battery storage or other type of dispatchable asset at that site, it relieves the grid in that area. So now that grid capacity is available to other customers, and you can get your interconnect more quickly because the load is already there.
Welcome to the Intergenius Podcast with Joe Patch IV.
I want to welcome everyone to another episode of the Intergenius Podcast. I'm excited today to have my guest, Bill Shevlin, on. He is the Chief Strategy Officer of Correlate. Bill, great to have you on today. Thank you.
Joe, appreciate being here. A fan of your podcast, so appreciate being here so much more.
Awesome. Well, it's good to have you in the flesh. So I appreciate you making the time. Let's get kicked off here to kind of get the audience up to speed. Give us a little bit of your background and how you got to where you are now, because we're going to go into detail there, but just kind of give us that on-ramp, if you would.
Yeah, I actually started my career in real estate development and management, and I was fortunate that I worked with a couple pension funds and asset managers early on, and learned very quickly if you made a building more efficient and it created more net operating income, everybody benefited. And so spent my career there. I transitioned into the commercial industrial sector on the construction side in about 2000, and have been focused on energy efficiency and retrofits since then. Have been involved in a couple 100 million square feet of retrofits. We did a lot of building envelopes, roofing, lighting upgrades, HVAC upgrades, any kind of energy efficiency measure. And then in 2008, some of our corporate clients were having issues with solar contractors that were installing on their facilities, creating warranty issues. And so we got paid to come in and fix the situation. So we got paid to learn, and have been in the pretty heavy in the solar and behind the meter space for on-site power since then. Got into the microgrid space in about 2018 because I had a friend that was doing some consulting for a couple large logistics companies that were looking at what does it look like when you do convert your vehicles to battery, several years ago, and quickly did the math and realized that the utilities were not going to be able to get the power there for those kind of facilities, and saw it as a market opportunity. And then was working on some microgrids and various projects to do on-site power for customers, and then joined Correlate August last year as strategy officer. And we're focused on large portfolio or industrial type clients to provide on-site renewables, on-site power, as well as help hit scope 1, 2, and 3 ESG goals.
Okay. What are some of the big components that you're looking to hit at Correlate? When you pick up a client, what are the first couple of things you're looking to evaluate you see as greatest opportunities for return?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's familiar with solar, and I don't think anybody disputes that solar works or has a net benefit to the customer, and typically has savings. But a lot of times now, it's a matter of the savings, but also the reduction of the carbon footprint. And then, being able to maximize the value of solar and on-site renewables for customers. And then that brings in battery storage and distributed energy and virtual power into the conversation, which creates a dispatchable asset. So really it's, focusing on reduction of cost, reduction of footprint for the customer, but that reduction in turn with today's technology and the way that you operate with the utilities creates a dispatchable asset for the utility, which also creates potential revenue opportunity.
That's right. When you look at solar and you look at battery in particular, what sizes projects, is there a sweet spot for you guys, or something you kind of want to see to get some momentum?
We typically, most of our customers, most of our projects, we focus on 1 megawatt or up, which are larger projects. In the project itself might not be 1 megawatt, but we may have a customer that has a large portfolio and aggregated over multiple sites. Those add up to a megawatt or more.
Okay.
We are in the process of building a project right now that's 5 megawatts of solar and 5 megawatts of storage for
Oh,
a
nice.
customer in Pennsylvania. And we're seeing, because of the cost of panels and the balance of system and everything that's being installed now, along with the Inflation Reduction Act incentives, we're able to hit. We typically provide power purchase agreements or energy service agreements where we basically provide the capital for the customer and we sell the power to the customer. And we're seeing numbers now where we're able to hit numbers that meet or beat the utility in some pretty inexpensive markets like Texas and Georgia and Illinois and Pennsylvania, where we wouldn't see these industrial opportunities in the past. And now we're seeing them a lot more, especially when we combine storage and some of the other virtual power distributed assets with these type of customers.
I've got my own take on that. What do you think drives it? What makes that possible today that, let's say, 5 years ago wasn't possible? What's the drivers?
Some of it is the cost of the panels and the systems have come down.
Sure.
We've gotten more efficient as an industry to install that, but
Right.
a lot of it is the cost of the battery storage, coupled with the technology to be able to essentially peak shave or reduce load at the site. That coupled with the cost that the utilities have had a lot of increases over the last few years to their customers. In California, we've had increases of 15% or more, but we've seen increases of 10 or 15% more in a lot of other markets that you haven't seen them traditionally. A lot of that's been driven by natural gas costs, coal costs, and other costs that continue to increase. But at the same time, when we do a system behind the meter, it's a much more intelligent system than the grid, and so you're able to operate it more efficiently, for the site or for the customer. And the other interesting thing, though, that we're having, a lot of conversations with utilities where they want to be able to, in some cases, upsize the battery at the customer. So if we're talking to a site, as an example, we had a call with an oil and gas customer earlier today. They've got a large asset where they're processing oil, natural gas. They want to put power on site to decarbonize their operation. And in the past, we would look at it and maybe optimize the battery for the site. Well, now we'll have an interaction with the utility operator and say, what does your grid sector look like? What is the opportunity to upsize? And a lot of times the grid actually wants more battery capacity because it's a quicker response. You have to think about it, a battery like a virtual peaker plant. So it's providing that power in a faster manner, and it's doing it in a essentially a carbon neutral manner because it's just a dispatchable asset that's been stored at the grid level.
That's right. Well, I like that. I hadn't really thought about that before, but that's an interesting concept, that the utility would step in and advocate for a larger storage. I agree on the dispatchability, kind of the virtual peaker. I haven't heard that, but I like the way you frame it. Is a utility willing to shoulder some of that load? Because the client might say, look, I need 3 or 4 or 5 megawatts or 10 megawatts. And the utility is saying, man, it'd be great if you could take 15 or 20. How do you arbitrage? How do you negotiate the difference?
Yeah, so that's really a conversation between the customer and the utility. And like I mentioned, we actually are having multiple conversations with utilities right now where if we're working with the customer and let's say we're going to put a 5 megawatt battery at the site, we have to have the conversation with the utility anyway regarding the interconnect and telling them what we're doing. But when we do that, a lot of times they're coming back and saying, hey, we'd like to have 5 more megawatts there based on not just that customer's load, but the load in that particular grid sector. And when they do that, they're actually willing to pay for it. There's 2 different ways. One, you can do a programmatic effect with the utility where it's a subscribed number. The other is what we're seeing is where the utility is actually willing to pay for part of that battery to have that resource. And then they control it from a distributed energy resource management perspective. So they've got control of part of the battery based on that resource. The customer controls part of it. It's all software driven, but it's essentially an interface between the utility and the customer. And then they take that power when they need that power to be able to balance the grid, provide lower cost, provide resource adequacy, or whatever whatever use the utility wants to use that battery for at the moment.
That's fascinating, Bill. It's kind of another thing I hadn't thought about. So I didn't realize you could do that on a battery. You can kind of segregate part of
Yeah,
it for different uses, and that's all. Is that all the SCADA system that's going to be tied to it? I mean,
yeah,
there's a lot going on there now.
yeah. The other thing that we're seeing too, Joe, is that the batteries
Wow.
over time, we're just starting to see AI applications and,
Wow.
resource applications. So, as an example, the battery is
Mhm.
going to learn from the customer load what's going on, how much of that battery is available, when it's available, how it's going to be
Right.
available. And so
Right.
over time, you can create kind
Interesting.
of a pattern. When we model a battery, we use the interval data that says how much power they're using, when they're using it, so we can size the
Uh,
battery properly.
right.
But again, over time, the system kind of learns how to optimize it. And
Uh,
just going back to the utility conversation, if we say the customer needs a megawatt, the utility may come in and say, hey, can you put another 500 kilowatt at that site because we need that type of resource on this many days. You can also take that battery and subscribe to different programs.
okay.
So, like here in
Okay.
California, if we know analyzing the battery that there's a megawatt available certain times, we can subscribe that battery into a demand response program.
Um,
Or if you have a lot of batteries, you can subscribe it into its own virtual power plant. That's what
mhm.
SunEdison and Tesla do, and some of the others do, where they essentially aggregate those batteries from the customer. They're allowed to
Mhm.
control the customer or the battery from the customer, and they're not taking power from the customer, they're taking available capacity from that
Right.
battery and providing it to the utility under that scenario. Money
Wow.
goes back to the customer as part of it. The
Right.
battery owner or the program manager gets part of that revenue. So, utility gets the, fixed cost power, they get the power at a certain subscribed rate. The
Right.
provider gets some of that revenue, and then the actual the battery site gets some of that revenue. It's similar if you've ever subscribed to a program with the utility where
Mhm.
you set your thermostat at a certain level, and during certain peak times they give you $20 a month or $50 a month or something to the residential
Right.
side. It's
Right.
similar
Right.
to that, but a much larger scale.
Wow. This is real. I mean, this is fascinating what you're bringing up. I mean, this is kind of an area I haven't spent a lot of time with, and it kind of addresses some of the real problems that we're seeing in the country today. We talk
It
about, are you able to meet demand curves? Are you able to transmit and generate, at a transmission distribution level? Can you get the power to where it needs to go? Interconnection takes forever and a day. I mean, running power, as you know, between different states is tricky.
it's difficult.
There's a lot to be done, and on top of that, we've got a bit of an aging, what would you say, infrastructure. So
Yep.
I think these solutions, the one we're talking about here, to me is really very attractive. I mean, you're kind of in the trenches, solving the problems, kind of at the locations, as opposed to building this giant utility scale facility, and then how do we get it to where it needs to go to the load center?
Yeah, part of it, Joe, is that a
Yeah.
lot of these large industrial sites, like a data center, a manufacturing facility, an oil and gas field, they
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of times they have continuous load, or they've got variable load, but the load is very high. And
Okay.
I'm talking about customers that take somewhere between 20 megawatts up to a couple hundred megawatts a year.
Okay.
And so when you think about that customer, they're pulling power on that grid sector all the time.
Yep.
If you can put battery storage or other type of dispatchable asset at that site, it relieves the grid in that area. So now that grid capacity is available to other customers, and you
Yeah.
can get your
Yeah.
interconnect more quickly because the load is already there. A lot of times you talk about the interconnect. I have friends in the utility space that do
Mhm.
large solar and storage projects, and
Right.
in California, the interconnect queue right now is 5 years for those type of projects.
Yep.
In ERCOT, it's 2 to 3 years. In PJM, it's 2 to 5 years, depending. So these larger
Yeah.
industrial
Yeah.
sites where you're able to put in the load at the site, you can get the interconnect quicker, but you're also providing that resource to the utility in a more effective manner because you're offsetting it. The other thing that we see is that some of our customers are trying to decarbonize, and so when they do, the load increases significantly. So we're working with a steel plant right now, and that steel plant uses a tremendous amount of energy. They're changing their furnace over the next 2 to 3 years to electric. Well, when they
Oh,
change
wow.
to electric, their load is going to go from above 100 million kilowatt hours a year to a couple 100 million kilowatt hours a year. So their energy consumption is almost going to double. A lot of it has to come from on site, a lot of it has to come from the grid. But
Right.
you think about that kind of power at one location,
Yeah.
it's fairly large. And to your point around the grid being kind of antiquated and you can't build additional power plants fast enough,
Right.
being able to put as much power at the site as possible and storage at the site as possible and create that dispatchable asset is the only way that you can get these facilities upgraded in any time, any kind of time frame. The other thing that we're seeing
Yeah.
right now is we're talking to multiple data center clients, and
Mhm.
these data centers are looking. These are AI type data centers, and the amount of power is they need somewhere between 30 megawatts all the way up to 500 megawatts at their
Wow.
locations.
Wow. It's
And
huge.
and so then and they need redundancy, right? So they need the grid connectability and they need redundancy for being able to keep that data center on. If they've got a higher tier that needs that redundancy, they might need 99.999% uptime. So
Right. Right.
so it's a large dispatchable asset. And in a lot of cases, we're also seeing sites being repurposed. So large industrial sites or former
Mm.
power plant sites that had the infrastructure that are maybe not being utilized anymore as a mill or a power plant. And you can bring in those bigger customers that have those heavy loads and build the infrastructure around it. There's a lot of things going on in the power market right now that are pushing more towards decentralization, and
Yeah.
honestly it's the only way that I know of that you can get that power to those customers in a timely manner. But also it creates that dispatchable network or that dispatchable resource. The grid is, that I know of, it's last infrastructure that hasn't been upgraded. We've upgraded the internet, we've upgraded the phone lines. I mean, we don't even have phone lines in many cases anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's one of the last assets to be upgraded.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point. And you kind of wonder too, the way, someone was arguing on a previous show about the way power is being used today is different than it was 50 years ago when the big plants were being built.
Yep.
And so it kind of like if you were to start from zero today with a whiteboard, you you'd have a different distribution, transmission, power generation setup for the
Yep.
way society operates today. And so in addition to arguing that, they also said, well, getting from where we are to where we need to go is going to be a challenge. And
it,
I
it
think you
is.
brought up all the right concerns. It takes forever to get power on the grid. Problem is you're chasing a moving target.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like it's got its old analogy. I mean, if you run it, we'll call it a 10-minute mile, and the guy in front of you starts at a 9-minute mile, and he's got a 10-second head start. He's always going to stay in front of you, man, unless you find an 8 or below or whatever the math would dictate to catch that guy. You're always going to be chasing, and that's a difficult position to be in, because not only are you on the wrong side of the curve, but what happens, when things like Texas, these grid failures happen,
Right.
and you run into these emergency situations. I mean, you're already behind the 8 ball, and now you've got a situation that you really just can't get your arms around, and you're kind of at the mercy of the weather, or of a quote, we'll call it a situation. And I think for all of us, that's a tough place to be. I don't care who you are. You can't
Yep.
control it. You can't solve it. You can't get your arms around it, and you just have to just watch it play out before your eyes, usually in a difficult way. Yeah. So the approach that you're talking about, the solutions that, you guys are offering seem to be a heck of a way to try to shore it up.
Well, just just on the resiliency factor alone, Joe, that putting on-site generation,
Mhm.
and in some cases, we're talking to customers where it's solar, maybe wind, and these are larger customers again, but it's solar,
Right.
maybe wind in certain regions. There may even
Sure.
be a gas genset in the background to provide like backup power and
Sure.
battery storage to make sure that they've got the resiliency.
Yep.
Because what you mentioned, the grid failures, and we see, I mean, if you look at wholesale power prices,
Mhm.
ERCOT a couple times this week hit $5,000 a kilowatt. And,
Wow.
so battery storage that was sitting there readily available for an asset made some crazy numbers as far as revenue.
They did all right.
And but part of that is because of the intermittency of some of the renewables. It's
Hmm.
new types of demands that are coming into the market that
Right.
were not expected. We had I was forwarded an email by a development partner that we
Hmm.
work with, and they sent me an email that was from one of the utilities in ERCOT, and the utility, they were asking about a data center client,
Hmm.
and the utility basically came back and said, right now we have a 2-year queue. They've had so many large customers come into their particular section of the grid
Oh,
that
wow.
normally they'd give a 3 to 6 month response to large customers saying, here, this is when we can get you power, this is how much power we can get you. They're saying that they have a 2-year backlog just to be
Wow.
able to respond to the customer and let them know how much power is going to be available, because there's so many of these large power users coming into the market right now.
I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. Just that demand. It kind of reminds me of a story one time. I went to a conference. This is probably, I don't know, I'm gonna say 15 years ago. And I remember checking into our room, and it was a large, I don't know, maybe it was like a 2-room suite or something. I can't remember. And there was a couple of us. And I remember, first thing you do, kind of set up your gear. I'm getting my laptop plugged in, my phone, and all of this. And it's crazy, but it wasn't like a super old hotel. We didn't have enough outlets. I mean, we were charging stuff in the hallway. Now, granted, we were in the corner. You felt relatively safe. No one's going to walk off with your stuff.
Yep.
But when you just simply don't have enough outlets in the room for a couple of 3 people to charge up. I
Yep.
mean, and this is before AirPods. So, maybe there was an iPod, there's the phone, there's the laptop, maybe you got something else. I don't know, maybe a Bluetooth headset back then, something of that nature. But it was my first sort of tangible, this isn't good. Because if you built the hotel with any forward thinkingness in mind, and I'm sure it was, I mean, you don't build a hotel to last 5 years. It's an asset that needs to perform over time. That was just really, really telling to me on a personal level. Like, wait a second, I'm not the only one who's walking around with a couple of things that need to be charged
Yeah.
on a regular basis. And so as you start to say, well, any additional device you add to any one person, I mean, it becomes exponential, and it's crazy where that goes when you think about it. But that's kind of the reality that I think we're facing today on a lot of levels.
Yeah, it's funny that the several years ago, before this was maybe 1 to 2 years before COVID,
Mhm.
they had San Francisco, and San Francisco in the other direction right now, but San Francisco was expanding rapidly, and there was a lot of technology companies moving into the
I
area, a
remember.
lot of
Yep.
biotech moving into the area.
Yep.
And I had heard, and this was from the utilities as well as a couple of developers, that
Mhm.
the grid was so congested in San Francisco that they couldn't add any new buildings because there was no additional capacity. And so
Wow.
the utility was
Wow.
actually looking at putting in fuel cells and generators on the grid in areas of San Francisco to be able to provide extra capacity, because they couldn't bring in additional infrastructure underground. Because when you think about it, like
Wow.
what you said, if we go back 10 or 15 years, just at a home or a hotel,
Sure.
the amount of power that we use is exponentially larger than it was before.
Yep.
Now if
Yep.
you go into let's say you go into a manufacturing or a warehouse district, A
Mhm.
lot of times when they planned and they put that district in place, they may have had a substation of a certain capacity. And that
Good point.
capacity
Yeah.
was based on 5 or 10 or 15 watts per square foot, which was mostly warehouse and logistics.
Yeah.
Well, now that, like here in California, in Southern California, and some of the areas around the ports, the larger customers are looking to put in EV chargers for trucks. Now, these trucks are, you're talking about a truck that maybe has a 250 kilowatt all the way up to a 1 megawatt battery,
Mm.
and they want to have 20 chargers, and they want to
Wow.
charge 2,500 kilowatt batteries at one time. That's like 10 megawatts worth of power that's plugged in at one point in time. And
Yes.
so what you're seeing is the inability for the grid to be able to get that there. If they could, they need to put a new substation in. They need
Right.
to, it's a 5-year process to get that in place. But the
Absolutely.
customer's
Yep.
like, I've got trucks on order. I need to be able to charge these things.
Yep.
And so, so you're seeing, as much renewables on site, battery storage, large EV
Mhm.
chargers, and even
Mhm.
gen sets in some case to be able to provide that power to some of these sites.
Yeah.
But again, that when that infrastructure is not being used by the customer, it's available for the grid, and then you've got capacity essentially where the
I,
grid can provide that power to other customers in some areas.
no, that's a good point. I mean, you hit on the EV thing, which I hadn't gotten there yet, but that's a game changer. I mean, we can talk about iPods and AirPods and all these other little ancillary, Bluetooth speakers and little things that people carry and want to charge all the time. But the minute you start putting in 20 EV stations and cars versus trucks, and then guess what? The guy next door is doing the same thing. The warehouse next door is doing the same thing. And you're right, putting in the substations. I mean, these things take forever. They're very, very expensive to put in. It's not going to happen overnight. And therein, now you get behind that curve. Time never stops. So
Yep.
what are you going to do? It's tough. When you look at the kind of the distributive energy side of life, we're looking. I mean, can you do a lot of the SGIP, at least in California?
Yeah, there's
That's
there's
got that helps.
there's SGIP programs. Batteries qualify for tax credits from the ITC or IRA.
Uh-huh.
But additionally, like I mentioned, in some cases, so we've had a couple conversations with a couple co-ops,
Mhm.
and the co-ops are actually looking to put in battery storage near their substations, and
Oh,
they're
really? The
they're
co-ops?
going to pay for it, right? They want to pay for it because they want that dispatchable asset, for their purposes, and even on the co-ops, Joe,
Um,
some of the conversations are interesting because co-ops, they're similar to CCAs. They don't have their own asset. They
right.
don't generate their own power typically, and they buy power from a large power plant somewhere. Well,
Mhm.
a lot of times now they
Mhm.
want to be able to control their own assets and have their own resources, and
Mhm.
so they're looking to implement renewables. They're looking to implement distributed battery storage programs.
Mhm.
Because it becomes, if you think about battery storage at multiple substations, it becomes a network. Now all of a sudden,
Mhm.
you can control that. You can control that network. You can manage the load. You can balance the
Right.
customers.
Right.
And again, it's kind of like a virtual peaker plant in those scenarios. So we're seeing a shift where some of these smaller utilities are wanting to own their own assets and or control part of that resource that the customer has behind their meter.
How often? I mean, this is really interesting. How often are clients using the battery for kind of arbitrage?
It,
Looking to
it
charge the battery during the day and then release it at night, see if they can't make a couple of bucks on the backside, or
most
not
of the time
necessarily.
most of the time it's for peak or load shaving during the day.
Okay.
But more and more we are seeing programs that the customers can plug that resource into and generate more revenue, or decrease their power bills overall.
Right.
So it is very strong economics, and in some cases we see, so we do a lot of PPA and energy service agreement, and
Right.
if we're doing a solar project or a customer, and maybe the project has a 10% IRR,
Um,
adding battery sometimes to that project can increase the IRR to 15 to 20%.
Wow.
because of that arbitrage ability.
Right.
One is you're able to deliver more power to the customer at a fixed cost. So now you've increased the size of the project,
Right.
but additionally making that battery available through that arbitrage method increases the return quite a bit.
Okay. That's interesting. I've kind of wondered. I've talked to different folks about that. It seems like it's certainly a very viable option. I think some more for some than others, but nonetheless I think it's definitely a viable option. And for those that it's really a good option for, I see them leaning into it kind of
Yeah,
regularly. You
it,
know.
it it definitely is, and there's some groups that are strictly playing the arbitrage market. There's a
Right.
developer that I know that has 2 gigawatts of battery storage in development in the ERCOT market, and they're planning on just arbitraging the market. Right, they're going to take
Okay.
that power in when it's cheap, sell it back out during the day when it's more expensive,
Right.
and the economics are very strong. It's a little bit more of a risk because if you're if you're financing or investing in that project, you're betting long term that that hedge is going to be available for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, which it
Absolutely.
probably will be. But it's a calculated risk that they're
That's
making. And
right. That's
I mean,
right.
if even if you look at the wholesale market here in California on a low day, the difference between the high cost of power and the low cost of power is about 30 cents a kilowatt hour almost every single day.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
when you think about an
Wow.
arbitrage perspective, you've got a 30 cent a kilowatt hour range on the low days. On the high days, it can be even more expensive. And the same is true with ERCOT. I don't think I think the range is a little bit more volatile in ERCOT, where it may
Okay.
be a little bit slimmer in the wintertime and way more volatile when it's under heavy demand. Just like the example that I gave where they were at $5,000 a kilowatt.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's an extreme, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not. It's been seen quite a few times over the last few years in the ERCOT market.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's yeah, to your point, it is I guess everything's a calculated risk really, but
Yeah.
I think there'll always be that opportunity. And maybe, I mean, what would neutralize that? I guess if you actually had enough, if you could really kind of balance the demand and
Yeah.
supply curve, right, then that goes away. But as we've talked about, I think to get to that point is not exactly tomorrow, and
Yeah,
it's going to take a lot of effort.
it's gonna be a
Yeah.
bit. I
Yeah. Yeah.
saw a report this morning that said that the amount of battery capacity in multiple grid sectors was projected to double this next year. Well, if it's a gigawatt and it's going to 2 gigawatts, and
Yeah.
the grid is like 1,000 gigawatts in that particular sector, you're talking about a fraction. It sounds great for a headline purposes because it's
Yes, it
doubling,
does.
but really
Yes.
it's a
Yes.
small percentage of the overall market. And to your point, it's going to
Yeah.
be a while before you're able to put all those assets online.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got the development cycle, you've got
Yeah.
manufacturing capacity,
Yeah.
you dealing with the utility, the
Yeah.
regulations, the
Yeah.
finance, everything. It's if we could wave a magic wand, we could go distribute the whole, the whole U.S. and balance everything out. But
Yeah.
nothing works like that.
No, no, it would be nice, but then I guess we'd all be out of work, so
Yeah.
that would be a tough one too. One of the things I like to ask too, when you look at it and evaluating different technologies, I mean, chief strategy officer, I'm sure you've got to play in, what projects make sense, what opportunities do we need to be pursuing, what markets do we need to get in, get out of, and then I think the technology, you probably got to you opine on that, I'm sure. How agnostic are you on the tech? I mean, when you look at battery suppliers, solar suppliers, for example, is it more about finding the right fit for that particular client as opposed to I'm really married to a particular technology that I want to employ in my portfolio?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
so that's a good question. So, when we look at a technology,
Mhm.
we have to, it has to be commercialized. It has to have been deployed at scale, and,
Okay.
and be financeable. Because if
Yeah.
it's
Good
not
point.
financeable, nobody's going to write a check for it. We
Right.
get, we get a lot of people coming to us that have the next greatest thing regarding storage or energy
Hmm.
generation.
Yeah.
And it can go anywhere between back of the napkin, bench level, or maybe just the first commercial installation. And it
Yeah.
may be incredible technology, but unless it's bankable and it's been deployed at scale, we can't utilize it.
Right. Okay.
Especially if
Yes.
we're writing the check, but also from a diligence or fiduciary duty from the client's perspective, we can't recommend a technology that we know has not been out and been proven in the market and been
Hmm.
financially underwritten.
Right.
There are insurance policies for performance of a system or a
Hmm.
battery or solar. There are manufacturer policies that you can get that guarantee it, but with technology that hasn't been commercialized, there's a higher risk, so there's a higher cost to that. So that
Right.
we're agnostic, but at the same time, it is trying to take the right technology and fit it to the customer.
Right.
And then we do look at additional measures. So when we're working with customers, we
Hmm.
we primarily lead with solar and storage, but a lot of times we're looking at thermal conversion to be able to take some of their BTUs and turn it into energy or reutilize it or replace natural gas. We look at
Right.
energy efficiency measures, building upgrades,
Right.
lighting upgrades, other things that add additional efficiency to that customer and add overall return to the project. But those also, again, they help hit those decarbonization measures for customers.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you talk about decarb, and I want to kind of get to that in a minute, but I think that as it relates to the agnostic nature, I think what it also allows for too is the what would you say? You want to cheerlead and support
Yep.
all the stuff that's coming.
Oh
And
yeah.
you're smart enough. You certainly know that in time we'll be using some of that stuff, and it'll be great, and we'll be able to plug it in, and it's kind of like you're not ready yet. Keep
Yep.
going. It's not that we don't love you. We would love to be able to use if this thing proves up, because I'm sure there's clients where in fact that would be even a better fit for
Yep.
particular reasons. So I think it's exciting on one hand to see the evolution, but also I think the certainty looking at history, it's some of these are going to make it, they're going to play out, they're going to get put into into the grid, and they're going to be client solutions, and it'll
Yep.
be neat to embrace them at that time. And I think it also allows for a little bit of the excitement and the creativity to keep doing what we're doing,
Oh
because
yeah.
we look at the technology today, it's not always going to be the same. There's always something more. I think that's intriguing. I think it's exciting, and to see how that can be embraced and utilized. I don't know. So I think there's a nice culture that you'll get your chance at bat, and we hope it proves up, because I think the more options that we have, the better it is for everybody. I mean, I like to see lots of people get to that place where they've developed and can deploy the technology that does
Yep.
make sense.
Well, and I
Yeah,
mean, we're talking about battery storage right now and
yeah,
virtual power and virtual
hmm,
peaker, right?
yeah,
We talked about it 3 to 4 years ago, right? The
yeah,
industry talked about it more of a concept and hey, this is possible. Now we're doing it and we're deploying it. So to your point,
yeah.
that technology evolved to the point
Right.
commercially, price wise, deployment wise, that now we're able to actually deploy these technologies and put them into projects.
Yeah, that's exciting.
So it those kind of technologies, they reach a certain critical mass and capacity, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, you see them everywhere.
Yep.
And
Yep.
the thing that we see, just on that side, Joe, is that like
Uh,
myself and our team, we have a lot of experience in that space and sizing the batteries and doing all the other measures that are required.
right.
And we see a lot of solar companies coming into the space and saying, oh, well, we're a microgrid company. Well, the
Uh,
reality is that they've installed solar, they maybe put in one battery, they probably don't know how to model it, they don't know how to do anything that we're talking about as far as
no.
like verify that the battery technology is financeable, make sure that
Right.
it's got the
Right.
right warranties, the right insurance policies, and everything else to put in place.
Right. Right.
But it's encouraging because more and more people are seeing the value and trying to get into that space and understand that space so that they can, essentially deploy as well. And we need as many people in the industry as possible. deploying scalable solutions that are
Yep.
also intelligent, that allow, some of the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's a great point you mentioned. The niche is bigger than we think it is. I think sometimes there's a lot of work to be done in this space, and it's kind of like you kind of welcome additional ideas, technologies, support the policy side. It's like you kind of need help everywhere you can get it. I also think it's an exciting time too if you're young or new in your career.
Yep.
It's a great space to be in because I think it's a fairly safe bet to say that if you're relatively young in your career, you could spend your whole career in this space,
Oh
no
yeah.
problem,
Yep.
solving problems. And because some of the stuff is so new, you don't have to be in it too long before you're the person that actually, let's say, is calling a little more of the shots. You're
Yep.
little more seasoned. This is not an industry per se that's been around 100 years, and you kind of have to get in line. And maybe at that sweet spot at the end of your career, you're the guy at the table kind of directing the traffic. I think that the onboard is pretty quick. I think that's pretty exciting, and there's just so much to do. I
There
mean,
is.
gosh,
There's
and with the RTOs, you got the interconnections, you got the utilities, you got the developers, you got the tech. It's like, I don't know, pick what you like. There's plenty to say grace over.
Yeah, and there is so much innovation going on in the
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
That we're going to be installing things and doing things in the next few years that we're maybe talking about today, right? So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
the industry is going to continue to evolve.
Yep.
We're going to continue to see technology developments on the control side or the virtual power side, the battery side, solar, other generation assets
Yeah.
that are just coming into the space now that we wouldn't even look at previously.
Sure.
So a lot of that space, a lot of stuff going on. The one thing that's
Hmm.
interesting, Joe, is a lot of the ESG conversations, or the scope 1, 2, and 3 conversations that we're having now.
Uh,
We've got a lot of portfolio customers that we're talking to that, you've got let's say a large publicly traded corporation that
okay.
has made mandates where they're going to hit certain percentage reduction by 2030, 2040, 2050, right?
Okay.
And so the board makes a decision, hey, this is what we're going to do. Well, they take that mandate and they push it out into their corporate culture and their
Mhm.
system, right? And they go to the sustainability manager, the facility manager, and the CFO, and they say, "Here's the numbers that we want to hit." Well, those groups essentially get the orders, and they don't actually know how to get there. So a lot of the conversations that we're having with some of our larger corporate clients have been around, we want to decarbonize as fast as possible. We don't want to, they always want to hit at least the same numbers that they're paying as far as energy costs, or a little bit less.
Right.
But a lot of the driver now is also those scope or those emission reductions, where
Yes.
we didn't
Yes.
see that a few years ago. We also tend to interface with the finance team, the facilities team, but also
Mhm.
that ESG or that sustainability person within the
Right.
corporation. And that position, if it existed 2 or 3 years ago, it was maybe just a nameplate. Now that position has mandates, they've got budgets, they report to the board. And so you have multiple parties that you're working with, that it doesn't become just about energy savings. It becomes about reducing those emissions and hitting those scope targets. The other thing that we hear a
Mhm.
lot in the market is the larger companies wanting to reduce their scope 3. Well, what that
Mhm.
means is they're basically going to start pushing mandates onto their smaller customers in the distribution channel or the manufacturing channel or somebody else. And those companies are even less prepared to be able to hit their scope reduction, to be
Yep.
able to meet their mandates that are being pushed upon them by their supply chain.
It's interesting that ripple effect is real and it'll have consequences. I see what
Yep.
you're saying, and I can see where those second and third level suppliers or partners are going to be caught flat.
They are, and and they don't. A lot of times they don't have as large a teams. They don't have
That's
the
right.
finance capabilities to pay for it themselves. They sometimes they don't know how to get there at all.
Sure. Sure.
So it becomes this. It does. It's a supply chain, but it does have those ripple effects down into the supply chain
Right.
where
Right.
at a larger corporation, they've got the team that can kind of deal with it, even though they don't exactly know how to get there. You
Hmm.
can imagine when it's pushed down the supply chain, they're
Yeah.
even more challenged. The other thing we
Yeah.
see is uh, we don't work in the municipal market, but we do talk and we do work with some
Mhm.
municipalities where
Okay.
California is an example. The municipalities are being required to decarbonize, not just their
Mm.
buildings, but their transportation. Well, their
Oh, wow.
transportation department might be one guy at the county level that is good at fleet and logistics, but now he's got to deal with utility infrastructure because how do they deal with putting in charging infrastructure or hydrogen
Right.
fueling infrastructure or some of the other infrastructure that's
Right.
required, or they want to put renewables storage and EV charging across all the city buildings.
Wow.
So
Wow.
then you've got
Yeah.
these government officials that are really undermanned. They don't have the expertise to do it. They don't have the budget to do it. But the state is basically saying you need to hit these goals, and they're like, okay, we're not sure how we're going to do that. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of gaps to fill, but
Yeah.
because of those gaps, we've got a lot of opportunities in the market.
Oh, I think that's true. Yeah. Well, as they say, there's opportunity and confusion,
Yeah,
and there's a bit of confusion here. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I like, kind of where you start. I mean, everything you said was on point, and that idea of, decarbonization really has a voice now at the table.
yeah,
And, companies, it's not so much we'll throw it up on the website, we'll use it in the slide deck, but what does it really mean? It's more we're gonna take action on this initiative, and we're gonna have the right people. We're gonna set aside the budgets, and because typically for the longest time it was always the money that drove that.
yep,
Can you get me
yep,
a better price? Can't get me a better price. So I'm fine where I am. Thank you though. I mean, come back and sharpen the pencil. Let me know. And now it's, you're trading on a different platform. Part of it's economics, and there's some
yep,
companies too that will even pay a little more
right.
because it does move them towards the strategic initiatives that have been set by the board and set by leadership, that this is where we're going to go and this is who we are, and we embody this, and as a result, if it costs a little more here and there, then we can accept that consequence because we're committed to this initiative, we're committed to the outcome. I mean, it's great because it allows for the opportunities that you're talking about to really materialize. I
Well,
get,
the one thing that's interesting too, just on that, is that
mm,
customers, like you said, they're willing to pay, but even if you just match their price, they're willing to do something if it helps them on the scope emission side. The
right,
other
right.
thing that we see is that the larger companies, they're global. If let's say you've got a US company that you're dealing with, because we have
Hmm.
some customers like this where they're
Hmm.
actually owned by a European parent. And so
Okay.
they're reporting their energy, but also their scope emissions to the European parent. Well, the European parent, if they're in the European market, they're buying offsets to
Yep.
to counteract what's going on in the US. So
Hmm.
there's a dual economic driver. So you've got the cost here, but you've got the cost at the corporate headquarters where that,
Hmm.
they may be buying offsets at $50 per ton. Well, when you translate that down to energy costs, that's worth 1 to 2 cents a kilowatt hour in some cases
Okay.
for some of these customers.
Okay.
So, if you meet the energy number here,
Uh,
they're able to avoid emission compliance on the other side because you've reduced their scope, and that's
Interesting.
direct corporate benefit because now they're not buying that offset to be able to meet those
Yeah.
numbers. And we see that. I mean, you
Interesting.
see
Interesting.
you see
Yeah.
you see headlines with the larger companies buying carbon credits and buying carbon offsets to meet their emission requirements, and that's great, and it supports different
Mhm.
types of projects. But if
Right.
the customer can reduce those emissions at their sites, that's the best way to avoid those costs. You avoid having to buy those credits or those offsets somewhere else in the market because you're reducing your emission at the
Yeah.
source, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of solve the problem where the problem exists.
Yep.
And then we don't have to worry about what we're going to do later. So No, that's it's really powerful. This whole idea of how do we help at a local level, so to speak? How do you help the big clients? How do you help the utilities help themselves in a lot
Yep.
of cases? Because they on the large generation, the LGIP side, they just can't, as we've established, they just can't get there fast enough.
Yep.
But it's good. I think the other thing too, this is my opinion, but I'm not into throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I
Yep.
think all the technologies where we sit today in this country have to be utilized and utilized intelligently. I don't think we can just latch on to one or two and say we're going to be fine. We're just not there. So I kind of like that mindset of, what can we reasonably do, and be
Yep.
okay with it. What they say, perfection's the enemy of progress, or whatever, however that saying goes. But to that point, we need, and I think have certainly established that we must have progress. We can't get stagnant because the curve is moving away from us at a rapid rate. So we have to stay in the hunt, and anything that would impede us in our progress, I think, would be truly detrimental. And to some extent too, if you're in the business, you kind of get it. There's a lot of people that are not in the business and they just don't understand. They just don't
Right.
get the fact that if you go to flip that light switch and it doesn't go on, and let's assuming it was wired correctly, that might be a couple of years before that switch actually turns the bulb on. And I think when you tell people that, sometimes they're like, "Oh, come on, man, you're just exaggerating." And it's like, you haven't been around project development in the power world, and that's okay. It's not your thing, but these are big issues. They're big problems. So attacking them from all different technologies, attacking them from a small, a distributed side, attacking them on the large power gen side. I think you're going to need it all. I just don't
Yeah.
see it going anywhere for a while.
Well, and I think, Joe, just to reiterate, these larger projects that we see with the customers that have the larger demand,
Yeah.
we always have to work with the utility, but like I
Yeah.
said, now we're seeing more of a cooperation between the large user and the utility to be able to
Good.
create that distributed asset and that distributed resource. And that's something that we had not seen in the past.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I mean, I've been in development for a while, and it's like build solar projects, and you wait for the utility to come out and say, okay, you can turn it on now. It's like, yeah, I know
Yes.
it's been generating power for 3 months.
I'm
You know,
laughing with you because I've been there.
it's
Yes.
but now with
Yeah.
batteries, if they realize that they've got a distributed resource there, a lot of times they're willing to fast track those kind of projects
Yes.
because, hey, it's going to provide capacity in an area that we need it, so let's
Right.
let's let's work with the developer to try to get that asset online more quickly. I mean, you're still bound by all the regulations and the
Sure.
red tape and the bureaucrats of the system, but we are seeing movement in the market, working with the utilities and the scope emission reductions and some of the other things that are in the space.
Yeah.
So it's a great time to be in the market and in the space. We're doing projects that I think we only talked about 3, 4, 5 years ago. We're
Mhm.
doing things in the market that we only really dreamed of a few years ago.
Right.
And we're able to work with customers that in the past you wouldn't really work with, oil and gas customers and large manufacturers, and doing projects that are 1, 5, 10 megawatt behind the meter. Those projects were really unheard of a few years ago.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but there is really a demand. There's the ability to go in and build these projects, get them
Uh-huh.
interconnected, get them resourced, and get them
Right.
financed for customers.
Yeah.
That's something that we hadn't seen before, but we're excited to be in this part of the market right now.
It's exciting. I would agree. I think energy is the great equalizer. I mean, unless you're looking to go back to candles, what are your options? So yeah, kind of tongue in cheek, but I love to see the cooperation. That's such a game changer. I think you hit on that for our industry, because before it really was kind of it's me versus you to some extent,
Yep.
and you'll kind of work on my timetable, and you're just going to have to kind of like it. There's really nothing to be said, and I think reaching out to one another, these fast track situations that you discussed, I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that we're all having to deal with the energy issue. I mean, honestly, unless you want to go back to candles or
Yep.
you want to live on a different planet, I don't. It kind of affects everybody, and I think it's good that people see that because
Yep.
it makes there's less tension, there's less me versus you, there's more of how do we collectively solve it? Because look, if we go offline, that impacts you, it impacts me. I mean,
Right.
everybody in that area, it's going to impact. I don't care who you are, what your name is, what your credentials are. You ain't got power, you ain't got power, and
Yep.
that, as we know, can be very problematic on many levels. So I guess I'm glad to see, and I think that's something that people in the business have thought about a long time. We're very interconnected as a society,
Right.
and this is one of those things that kind of affects everybody. So I love to see that the collaboration, the cooperation, and quite frankly, to your point, it just gets deals done. It solves problems. Problems are not going away. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, that's really one of the things I want to kind of end with on today's show. I've loved where we've gone with the conversation. I really appreciate your insight, sharing everything you have. It's been really fascinating. One of the questions I want to ask you is, what's one of the best lessons learned that you've kind of had in your career? I mean, maybe it was your first year on the job, maybe it was last week, but as you think through your career, and it could be anything. I mean, it could be a moral situation, it could be a tactical, it could be strategic, executional, operational, something that stands out to you that you lean back on and you say, this was a great lesson learned, something I apply, I lean into regularly, and quite frankly, maybe it's underpinning for your success.
I think a lot of it is really just, working with the customers that can do something.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah,
what I mean by that is that,
sure.
customers, a lot of times you start talking with a customer and they've got these grand, bold visions to want to be able to do something. But, can they execute on their side? And what I mean by that is, do they have the ability to actually make the decision to do it?
Yeah.
And then if you're looking to finance that project from a PPA's perspective,
Mm,
can you underwrite them and the project? Because
right.
that's ultimately what it comes down to is, can you do something for the customer? Can it be executed? And can it be paid for in one way or another? And if
Yeah.
the answers to that are no, then unfortunately that's not a customer or a site that you can work with, because it's not executable. So it's trying to focus on those
Yeah.
executable solutions, but also
Yeah.
just trying to find the best solutions for the customer. And that's, I've always driven my career on trying to create the best possible outcome for the customer. Because if you can save the customer money, or you can create what they're really looking for, and you can do it over and over and over again for them, that's really the ultimate outcome. Is
Sure.
the success of the customer is the success of you and your company.
I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more. 100%. And it's something that we think about as a recruiting company in this niche, is that when we're looking to engage with a client, that comes right at the very forefront. I want to
Yeah.
help you. We want to help you. We want to build your team. We know as your team grows and you're successful, we'll keep building your team. And there's a rush when you build good teams and you put together, help build companies that are really dominant in their niche. And so I think that's a huge driver. But to your point, I can't get you there. We can't get you there. Are you clear on the role? Are you
Yep.
clear on the components of the role? Do you have a process to get this person interviewed in a timely fashion? Are your economic expectations reasonable for what the
Sure.
market is going to demand today? And to your
Yep.
point, if we can't get there on those, what I would call indispensable components, we just can't help you. And it's
Yep.
it's it's a real non-starter. And it's sometimes it's a difficult conversation, but I always hope that when we have that conversation and we're not able to engage, hopefully it leaves the client, or what would be a potential client, hopefully in the future, with some things to think about to help kind of level up a little bit. Sometimes
Yep.
the expectations are just not realistic, and I'm sure you run
Sure.
into that all the time. Hey man, we want to do this and want some wind, and I want some solar and a couple of battery, and it's like, whoa, do you even have a footprint I can put this stuff down on?
Right.
You
Yeah.
have any idea what a wind turbine looks like? I mean, you're in the middle of the city. This is I don't know what you're talking about, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
helping them help themselves, I think is a big part of it. So
Yep.
I agree. I agree. Making sure that you actually have a foundation to stand on is important.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think on
Yeah.
your side of the fence, Joe, if you're talking to a potential customer where you're going to place somebody,
Yep.
I would think that some of your conversations end up where the company wants to hire a person, they want to pay them probably less than they should
Yep.
be paid, or some kind of structure that's less, but they expect tens of millions of dollars worth of revenue out of the person, or tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars of results without really
Right.
paying for it. So again, it's balancing what the expectation is with the
Yes.
customer, and trying to fit the right person with the right market.
That's exactly right. And oftentimes you get what you pay for. I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds trite, but there's just a lot of truth to it. You pay an individual what they're worth, you give them some real opportunity. I think oftentimes you'll be surprised at how much they give you.
Oh
I
yeah.
think it's oftentimes more than what you think. And I think, yes, if you try to shave somebody, I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of pain. So that's a road we don't travel. It's just
Yeah.
that's bad for business. We'll pass on that one. But no, I appreciate your thoughts. The lesson learned was great. The final comment is really for you. We had a lovely conversation. I've really enjoyed this time visiting with you today. Is there anything else you want to throw out here at the end that we didn't touch on, or something that was in your mind you want to circle back to, but just kind of give you the final go?
No, I don't think so. Joe, I just really appreciate the time on your podcast, and again, fan of your podcast, for a while, and what you do, and just appreciate the opportunity and the work that you do in the industry. I think that the industry needs more things like this, needs support of the right team members in the right place, and it's, again, just it's exciting time to be in the industry. We're working with a lot of customers that you wouldn't have thought that would even be a target a few
Mm-hmm.
years ago. Hitting, I mean, we're seeing, just as an example, we're seeing PPA numbers in the 5, 6, 7 cent range on some of these larger projects in certain markets, and those numbers were unheard of before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously a lot of that's driven by the incentives in the particular market, or the tax
Mm-hmm.
credits, but still, you're able to deliver large projects with low cost power that are decarbonized for customers, and then again create, with a microgrid, create a dispatchable resource that the utility can utilize.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it's something that we talked about a few years ago, but now we actually are able to do.
Yeah.
So it's a great time to be in the industry, and appreciate your work.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. No, I think you summed it up perfectly. It is an exciting time to be here. And as I say, oftentimes I'm just happy to have a front row seat. I'm just
Yep.
happy to be on the team and in the game and trying to contribute what we can. So, Bill, thanks a million. Appreciate you being on today. I had a lot of fun. This was a great show. And I want to say to everybody else, if you're interested in coming on the show, check us out, intergeniuspodcast.com, right there behind me. And remember, there's a genius inside of all of us. It's up to you to discover it, harness it, and share it with the world. So the question always is, what's your inner genius?
This is the Padua Podcast Network. PaduaPodcastNetwork.com.